Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
As we know now, former Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Superintendent Dr. Heath Morrison surprised many by resigning from his position the day before Election Day this year, November 2nd to be exact. Reason for resignation was to focus more on family as the story unfolds and continues to develop, in fact. And as it turns out, the CMS Board of Education had another idea. They were planning to terminate him for cause. Reasons including misleading board members about costs associated with the building project, as well as berating and mistreating employees were the charges. Welcome to the Carolina Business Review WTVI PBS Charlotte Education Special, CMS, Lessons in Leadership. I'm Chris William, and beyond the initial shock of someone who clearly enjoyed wide-ranging confidence of leading this state's second largest school system into a new and more competitive, prolific model of public instruction, how did this happen so quickly? Why weren't concerns with such far-reaching effects more broadly debated before profound action was taken? Is this a cautionary tale of board governance or just a bad hire? What is the fallout in the classroom, and how do we rebuild public confidence in leadership? In a moment, we're joined by CMS School Board and former school board members, a teacher, and public school advocates.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This is a Carolina Business Review WTVI PBS Charlotte Education Special, CMS Lessons in Leadership with John Gresham, Eric Davis, Molly Griffin, Richard Stick Williams, and Joanna Scamitzi. And now, here's Chris William.
Well, welcome to CBR WTVI PBS Charlotte Education Special. I'm going to take a point of privilege right now, and while we did introduce our members, at least our panel members, I want to do it with a little bit more detail, starting on my left and going to the right on our front row. Stick Williams, a Senior Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety for Duke Energy and President of the Duke Energy Foundation. In addition, I will say this, among many honors, but Stick is also co-chair with Anna Spangler Nelson of Project Lift, grew up as a public school product in Greensboro, North Carolina. Next to Stick is Molly Griffin. Molly was a longtime fixture on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board and at one point also chair of that school board. She is an attorney and a parent and grandparent of CMS children. Next to her is Eric Davis. He is a current school board member from District 5. He is also an employee of Wells Fargo and has sat on more than one or two commissions around the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board. In our back row, John Gresham. John is an attorney, a practicing attorney, focusing on employment and labor litigation, public employee rights, constitutional law, general litigation. He has devoted a significant part of his career representing public school teachers and UNC employees. And finally, last and certainly not least, and maybe even most importantly, she is in her 8th year in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg system as a teacher. That is a front-facing position with students and parents. Her name is Joanna Scamitzi, and she is a biology teacher at Independent High School. Ladies, gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to see you. And let me just say, this is a timely, it's a tender topic. It is an important topic to many people in this community. And that is, of course, I'm referring to the surprise resignation of Dr. Heath Morrison and some of the revelations, true or false, that have come to light. Mr. Davis, you are a current Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board member. Eric, how did we find ourselves here? Was this a surprise to you?
I was immensely surprised at not only what we've done, but how quickly we did it. I think by any measure that's important to the community, or certainly the Board of Education, Heath Morrison had the system moving in the right direction. Our graduation rate was continuing to climb. Our academic performance was going up. Certainly it's not where we need it to be, but he did a terrific job of managing the changing headwinds in Raleigh and helping us build better relationships there. He did a marvelous job of restoring relationships in our community, more than any other person in my estimation, over the last 2.5 years. And so in my view, he was a terrific superintendent, and I wish he was still our superintendent.
How did we find ourselves here, though, Eric? I mean, first of all, we heard the news that he resigned. And second, of course, the charges by the internal investigation that said he was berating employees, that he was misleading, and so on and so forth. So it seems like, and you know, we're going to give the panel a chance to talk here, but it seems like we're hearing two different aspects of this leader. We're hearing a CMS board story, and we're hearing his story.
So a investigation was launched by our general counsel in early October, the content of which was then shared with the board, and through a series of closed session meetings and dialogue with Dr. Morrison, he elected to submit his resignation. My concern with what we've done is the process that we used. The investigation was never authorized by the board, at least not in my participation. We did not seek outside counsel, which is a best practice and certainly one that our district has followed in the past in similar situations. But most importantly, we never talked to Dr. Morrison. And it's incumbent upon an employer, I believe, when issues arise around performance or any other matter, the first inclination I have is sit down and talk to my employee and hear their side of the story, and then if necessary, take corrective action. I think that approach would have been much more representative of the best interest of our district, the employees that were affected, Dr. Morrison, and our students.
Molly, former chair of Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board, a parent, a person that's got a lot invested in not just education but this community, and a former member of the CMS Board of Education. What did you first think when you heard this news?
Well, I was very surprised and very dismayed. I think it was a very difficult thing for the school system to have to go through. I'm an outsider now, but I'm a pretty careful observer of CMS. And as far as I could tell, things were going very well, both from the school board and from Dr. Morrison. As Eric said, our student achievement is rising, our dropout rate is falling, and for the most part, this school board has done a good job of staying focused on the prize and avoiding unnecessary conflict. In particular, this school board has done a very good job of staying out of the news. It's never a good idea for the board itself to be the news. The focus needs to be on the school system. And that has all of a sudden just seemed to fall apart.
Is that, Madam Chair, if you will, I can still call you that, it's not just a place of honor, but also because you did a good job, Molly. But so is this about board governance, or is this about an executive we hired that we didn't know some of these traits that he had? Eric, you talked about that you inferred rather that there was some remediation with, if that were the behavior that could have been done before it came to this. You made some public comments about that. But Molly, is this about board governance? Is that what this is?
The problem is that we don't know what it's about. I think there's just too much information that we haven't been given, that we can't analyze.
Is that distressing to you?
That's very distressing to me. I want to say that I have a lot of empathy for this school board because I think it came in large part out of the blue. They didn't have policies and procedures to deal with this, and so they were scrambling to do what seemed best in difficult circumstances. clearly what we need is policies and procedures to deal with this so that it won't come as such a surprise if it ever should happen in the future.
Is there, Stick, I'm going to come back to you in a second. John, I want to go to you. As the JD in this, as the lawyer, as the one who has spent some time not just litigating, but also statistically going through these type of labor law cases or even HR, as you hear some of the comments, is there a way to mitigate or remediate some of these issues that have already happened, but keep them from happening through legal channels or even compliant channels? Or is this, again, same question, is this about board governance?
Well, I think Eric was exactly right. If there were issues about the superintendent that had come forward, there are lawyers, Eddie Spees, who was the Assistant Attorney General for Education, lawyers here in Charlotte, former board members who are attorneys. You don't make a decision like this typically on an investigation that the superintendent never sees, and that if you read the papers this morning, there were perhaps issues that would have questioned how the investigation was handled. So the board put itself in a very bad position, and if it ever reaches this again, I would suggest you get someone from outside the system to review all that has happened. The superintendent got a very good review this spring after one of the folks who had come forward with complaints about his treatment of her had moved. So it's puzzling to me as a lawyer how this kind of investigation was done, and I guess we'll learn as time passes. And I promise I'm going to ask the question, it sounds like I'm leading and putting words in your mouth, but isn't the standard operating procedure with this type of profound action to have, if not outside counsel, certainly an outside third party take a look at this before any decision would be made? Yes, and I would always think you would have talked with the superintendent. In most of the matters I handle, the first thing I'm saying is you need a fair process. And it's never a fair process if the person who's being accused of things does not have a chance to respond before the employment action occurs.
Stick, it's probably not a fair question, but are any of these questions fair? Has there been fair and due process in all of this, at least so far?
Well, that's a very, very good question. All I know is what I've read in the newspaper, and I've tried not to judge based on that. What I do know is that we did have a great superintendent, but from a Project Lift vantage point, we also had a very, very supportive and engaged school board. So I'm trying not to cast any stone. That's been damaged in some way. So we're anxious to see what the next steps are going to be.
Joanna, as an educator, as a teacher, as a rank and file on the front line, see the students, see the parents, see other teachers. What is the response that you see and hear from your colleagues, but also some of the families at Independence?
Well, I think first and foremost, families should feel very comfortable that their students' needs and student achievement is still the priority of the district, the school board, every employee in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And so that has really been the message that we've been trying to communicate with each other, is to stay focused on student achievement. But I think there's a lot of confusion and feeling like we're not receiving the information directly, and I think it makes employees on every level of the district feel very cautious about, well, if this is what would happen to the superintendent, that they might not get a fair chance to discuss feedback. That would everyone be treated that way? Would a principal be treated that way, and then would a teacher be treated that way?
Before the program, we had a chance to talk extensively, and I know we were all out here, as we've all been in this community now for the last few days, last couple of weeks, embroiled and surprised, and how could this happen? Why did it happen? And you used, and we were talking, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Joanna, but you used the term that you seemed like it was a corporate setting, and it was something you weren't used to. Would you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, my husband has his MBA, has a master's in economics, and I turned to him this morning and said, is this what would happen to a CEO if the board, I said, can you explain to me like how a board of a privately or publicly owned company would handle this? Is this how employees of a publicly or privately owned company would get information? And I think it's just maybe a knowledge gap in terms of if we're starting to treat schools and school districts like businesses, then the employees really don't have enough knowledge about how a business is run. I think in a school setting, and Superintendent Morrison used to say he was a teacher on special assignment. And so I think it's very interesting that if all of your training is on what is it like to work in a school setting, this is very unclear because this seems like it's being treated very differently from a corporate point of view rather than from a school setting, a feedback, a growth mindset, which is what we instill in both our students and our teachers.
This is going to be purely conjecture. Could this been avoided?
Absolutely. I think much more.
And oh, by the way, Eric, is Dr. Morrison guilty of some of these crimes?
Well, so let me ask the first question. I think it entirely could have been avoided simply by doing what John suggested. First, sit down and talk to the superintendent, share that we have some concerns and we need to hear your perspective on it. And there's a whole series of options the board had at that point, from engaging outside counsel to do a more thorough investigation to if the board concluded that Dr. Morrison's needed some assistance, some coaching, counsel, reprimand, whatever. There's a whole series of options that a prudent employer could use that never enter into the legal matter. It's all HR matters. So, and my belief is, had we taken that approach, whatever guilt or innocence Dr. Morrison had, if we had dealt with it in a supportive, coaching manner, even challenging for improvement, we could have helped him become an even better superintendent and at the same time provided better care and support to the employees that were affected. In this case, we've made it entirely a legal matter and have missed the opportunity on both fronts.
And I know this is a personal question, but do you think he would have complied? Do you think he would have welcomed the support? Maybe not easily, but would he have been pliable?
My interactions with Heath Morrison is he has been the most open superintendent I've ever worked with in terms of giving and receiving critical feedback. He and I have had a number of heated, passionate, disagreeing arguments. And in each case, we've disagreed, but he's not been disagreeable. In fact, I think one trait he has is the ability to stay in a conversation like that, but you walk away saying, I want to keep talking to that guy. So how would he have reacted? That's my only intelligence about how to respond or predict. Yeah. It certainly would have been better than our current state, in my opinion.
Yeah, John, you look like you want to reflect on some of that from maybe a law.
No, what I was going to say, my dealings with the superintendent, he did have a manner that could be off-putting. However, it was not something that I ever felt would have been the reason for his leaving. And from hearing what Eric is saying, he could hear criticism. Now, you never know how somebody's going to react to it, but at least it seems to me you give them the chance to hear the criticism, hear what coaching may well. Hard driving executives sometimes need to understand how they're perceived from the people who work under them, and they learn from it. So the fact that he never had that opportunity is puzzling to me.
Stick, I'm going to come back to you and Joanna about maybe some short-term effects in the near term, but I want to take one more quick question, and it's not an easy question, but it's a quick question on what other ramifications in the short term. So CMS's website says that Ann Clark is now not the interim, not the temporary, but has taken on the duties, quote unquote, of the superintendent. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone doesn't like Ann Clark, doesn't think she's a capable educator, a person, a kind soul, someone that clearly puts kids first and doing the right thing. Ann Clark is in the middle of this, one way or another. There have been several the Charlotte Observer reports that talked about lieutenants of Heath Morrison. Ann Clark seems like she would be in there, so or at least in that group of quote-unquote lieutenants. So is Ann Clark, and I know you'd both know her, if not all know her well, is Ann Clark in a difficult position? Is she in a difficult position from the point of view of credibility, of managing now forward through a tough time? And number three, would she even want to do it? And Molly, I'll start with you.
Well, I am an unqualified supporter of Ann Clark. I've known her as a principal in my children's school and as a school board member and working with her as an administrator. So I'm very, very high on her, and I have to admit that bias. She is in a very difficult situation, made more difficult by this non-disclosure agreement that's in the contract. So I don't know, I'm no expert, I don't know what she can and cannot say. Bottom line, I have the utmost respect for her integrity and her ability, and I think she can work through this given the time and the support.
So Eric, can Ann Clark work through this? And how much did Ann know? I know that's probably not something that you really know, but somebody has to know how much Ann knew besides Ann.
So like Molly, I'm a firm believer in Ann Clark, not just as a board member, but as a CMS parent. I can't think of another person over the past 30 years that's poured more of their heart and soul into not just our school system, but our individual children, and has done more for our children than Ann Clark. I think that my responsibilities as a board member call upon me to choose the best person that's a candidate for the job of superintendent, and I certainly feel that Ann needs to be a candidate. I don't know what the other choices are at this point, and so I reserve making a judgment on that, but I have full confidence in Ann's ability to lead the system during this transition period and to provide the stability that we all yearn for our children.
What's the timeline to do a search for another superintendent?
That's up to 9 people. Typically, superintendent searches occur in the spring of the year and are concluded by May or June. That's what makes this particularly challenging, not only the circumstances at which we're separating from Dr. Morrison, but also the time of year. Superintendents don't come and go in November of the year. We typically make those changes in the spring. But I think a broader question is to the implications of this decision, and that is the typical cycle is we'll go through a year of transition while we're looking for a superintendent. Then the new superintendent has to go through a year of learning our system and getting on the ground. And then that really starts the clock of when we get good, productive work out of a superintendent. And our track record is that period of good, productive work is far too short, typically 2, 3, 4 years. And then we start the cycle all over again. It is highly disruptive, particularly for an organization that can't change quickly, that change comes by incremental adjustment year over year and a continuous push to raise the performance of the system. When we change superintendents, it's highly disruptive.
How much would this, and one last question, and then Stick, I'm going to go to you about a credibility question. How much impact would recent events have on a pool of candidates that would be willing to move to Charlotte-Mecklenburg?
I think we've dug ourselves a deep hole. You start the recruiting process with a new superintendent as the current superintendent exits. And every candidate watches us to see how we treated the former superintendent to determine whether they want to stake their reputation, livelihood, and their family income on our school system, particularly the Board of Education. And I'm critical of myself and the board as a whole in the manner in which we've conducted these events in terms of our ability to hire another good quality superintendent.
If I might interject one thing.
Go ahead, John.
Currently, I think, and Ann Clark is a Davidson graduate, as am I, and so I have watched her move up through the system doing very, very good work. Her candidacy is in some ways harmed by the fact of what we now don't know, of how this came about, and that's going to leave questions in people's mind. I have thought that the school system may want to think still about having an outside person review what has happened.
So John, what you're saying is it's not too late for unaffiliated third-party review of processes, or?
Well, the board would have to provide the mandate. But
is that bell already been rung? Is it too late for the board to change?
I don't think so, but there again, I'm not on the board, so I don't know. But I do
Molly,
think.
Eric?
Well, I would say that, first of all, one of the lessons I always try to teach my kids was that if you make a mistake, you got to first admit you made a mistake and then ask for help to avoid making that mistake again. So that's where I think they find themselves. I don't think it's too late to do that, and I think that's what they need to do.
Yeah, I agree with Molly and John. I think one of the first things we could do is we should fully disclose the documents and the process and the timeline and the logic we used in making these decisions recently. The community we serve deserves that at a minimum. And then secondly, I hope our board, we will hire an outside attorney skilled in employment law matters to come in and review those events along with our policies, regulations, structure, processes, and then advise us on what we need to do to change. At the very least, we should learn from these painful days we've been through.
Which seems ironic, a school system learning. Not in a bad way, but it just seems ironic. So Project Lift has not a small investment in the success of not just CMS, but the 5 particular schools or more that Project Lift has made an investment in. How critical has the credibility of the school board and of CMS been hit by what has gone on here recently?
So before we even launched Project Lift, and fortunately for us, Eric was chair at the time, we had a number of meetings and discussions with school board members. We wanted to be certain that they within themselves were solid, working very, very closely together. There had been a period of time where the board, the previous board, had seemed to be dysfunctional. We weren't willing to make that kind of an investment with a dysfunctional school board, but we were very, very satisfied by Eric's leadership and how the board was coalescing around providing great leadership. We had a superintendent at the time, Pete Gorman, that sat at the table with us, and Clark was around the table. And I would say to your audience, if you're pleased with Project Lift, if you've got very good thoughts about Project Lift, you've got very good thoughts about Ann Clark, because she was at the table. She came up with great ideas, great examples, did a lot of good research, shared that openly with us, and where the system was hurting, was very, very, very instructive to us with regards to how we ought to shape this project. But anyway, we had to be absolutely certain that, one, the school board was committed and the superintendent was committed. So every time there's been a change in superintendent, Dr. Gorman leaving, and then of course the interim Hadaball leaving, and then Dr. Heath Morrison, there was a bit of a jolt because we knew that there was going to be a period of time when there was uncertainty, around the system and the system support, the system's commitment, the system really focused on what we were trying to do. With Dr. Morrison, we had a superintendent that just had zero doubt about what we were trying to do and the importance of what we were trying to do. That was very, very important to us. But at the same time, Eric and the other school board members participated. They continued to come to meetings with us and so forth. And so we knew that we had the support of both. This was a big surprise to us. We weren't expecting. We'd had a series of meetings with Dr. Morrison focused on what's next, what's after Project Lift, what's after those 5 years, and we were doing a lot of good planning, and seemingly had a commitment that he was in for the long term. So it was a shock to us when we heard that, first of all, that he was resigning. So we still believe in what we're trying to accomplish. with the 9 schools in the West Charlotte district.
9 schools, yeah, I stand corrected.
We,
Thank you.
we still have a lot of confidence that the individual members of the school board are committed. Our big concern is that whatever transition, and especially thinking about what Eric described a little earlier about the cycle of searching and then orienting, and then the new superintendent determining what their own priorities are. By then, Project Lift, the 5 years, is done. And so we've got a little bit of concern about how this interim period of time plays out, and just what the focus on the system is going to be.
So how does that change the strategy rolled out now by Project Lift, or maybe tactics employed by Project Lift in almost a triage situation? Or does it extend Project Lift's timeline? Are there casualties now because of this type of effect that Project Lift will, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but do you freeze certain actions until other actions are taken?
No, I think that's a very good question and a fair question. The biggest concern that I would have is that some of the funders, again, we raised $55 million from a large group of donors. The initial concern is that some of the donors would get cold feet and not want to be in until some of the questions that we now have are answered. We can't afford to put an initiative like this on hold. I mean, those children are learning, they're getting excited. There's a lot of great culture change happening in those schools. We can't afford to put that on hold for a period of time. So number one, that some board members or some funders would get cold feet. The other piece of that is can we sufficiently plan about what's next? So we do know that the district has already replicated a lot of the great things that we've discovered in Project Lift, meaning that they've seen this practice, they've determined that they can take this practice and replicate it in other schools. So we see a lot of that happening now. What we don't need to see is that activity stop. We need to see the district in some way continue to look at us as a laboratory and then to incorporate those learnings. That's a big risk too, because we always consider Project Lift not only as an opportunity to do some great things in this group of schools, but to be a laboratory for the district to really identify some great practices that could be successfully incorporated.
One of the conversations, and again, I'm not pretending that I've been in board meetings with you, but one of the conversations that's been important to Project Lift, privately and publicly, has been teacher flight, losing talent to South Carolina or losing talent to other parts outside of North Carolina. I see you nodding over there, Joanna. Haven't forgot about you. So by way of Joanna, I'm going to come back to you. Are you losing colleagues and friends?
Oh, definitely.
Does this make it harder?
I think that not only, we had a great advocate in Dr. Morrison. He would
was that
sit
widely,
down.
and I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but was that a wide expectation that most teachers thought he was going down the right road?
I believe so. From my colleagues, I've gotten only real positive feedback. He would sit down with teachers and have genuine conversations with them, and so I think that this is worrisome about who's going to come next, and will teacher leadership be a priority to that. But I think it's also a worry about the general public's confidence in the district, and the fact that the $0.25 tax raise didn't pass, and you have a lot of teachers who work second jobs to make ends meet. I'm one of them, and so I think that when teachers feel like the whole district is in upheaval, if they get an offer in a different district, they're probably going to be more willing to take it this year.
Does the loss of talent in the classroom, does that undermine what your ultimate goal is in Project Lift?
Absolutely. One of the pillars for Project Lift was surrounding these students with extraordinary talent. And without that, we could not be successful. And so when we spend a tremendous amount of dollars, and I know the district does the same, in developing this great talent, and then to see that talent leave is very, very painful.
John, you've represented teachers against school system.
Still do.
And still do. So reflecting and hearing this comment, how do you come down on some of these issues about the loss of the talent the underpayment of the teachers versus other areas of the country, even though there's been move in the General Assembly to kind of close that gap. Where are we given what we're talking about here?
Well, as these two former chairman of the school board knows, that's always the biggest question. At times I have questioned that the size of the central office may be a tad large, but that's from a perspective of somebody who works with teachers and deals with them. I think Project Lift is a great opportunity because it gives teachers who want to take a challenge, who get some reward for it, to be in an experiment. So I think things like Project Lift are an asset to the school system. It has varied over superintendents how I feel like the teachers I represent, what sort of process they have. Our best superintendent ever was the first one I dealt with, Jay Robinson, who was so long ago that only Joanna would not remember him. But he had a genuine way of understanding the problems when there was an issue with the teacher. I see that ebb and flow with superintendents, and that's something that I would like to see with the search for the superintendent, to have someone there to ask him or her questions about how they would, how involved they would be. It is very hard to things to get to the superintendent. They come up through a lot of levels, and I'm sure that's at times exasperating for the superintendent.
We've got about a third of the program left, and I want to get to this idea. Thank you, John. I want to get to this idea of longer lasting effect. And maybe if you came in halfway through this program, or you've just heard 5 minutes of it, you might think we're either in the camp of Heath Morrison, or in the camp of the CMS board, or in the camp of the public, or in the camp of the teachers. When we're trying to have a dialogue about what is appropriate and how this is going to affect us, and that is the surprise resignation of Dr. Heath Morrison. So not to continue to beat up the body that you are elected to, and that's the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board of Education. Is this about the quality of people now that run for public office? Forget about CMS Board of Education, but in general. Molly, is that what this is? Is this a different breed now? You talked about Jay Robinson. He was an appointed official or a hired official, and these are elected officials. Is it different now?
I think it's very difficult to convince people to run for public office. If you start from the point that you want thoughtful, committed people who have no particular agenda, they say, why would I do that? Why would I undergo the public scrutiny, give up the time with my family, the time with my business? It takes an inordinate amount of time to do a public service job. But I was convinced when I ran, and convinced when I tried to convince Eric to run, that unless sensible people step up and say, okay, I will do this, then our whole system of representative democracy is at risk. And that sounds like an overstatement, but our system does depend on our thoughtful peers stepping up and running for office.
So Eric, you're serving, and I'm careful not to indict you or any of your board members necessarily, but does Molly, and we all talk about it in cocktail parties or side bets or running into each other at the grocery store, how we will roll our eyes, and I'm not just talking about school boards in Charlotte-Mecklenburg or Wake County, but I'm talking about city councils and county commissions and other elected roles. Is it a different caliber of person with a different level of experience now that runs for public office?
Well, my experience on on this Board of Education is we are actually a legal creature of the legislature. We're an extension of the legislature. And so we have a limited span of decision-making authority, who we hire as a superintendent, where we assign students, where we build schools, and some local policy. But the preponderance of education policy is made in Raleigh, a little bit in Washington. The preponderance of funding is in Raleigh, some in Washington and some locally. And we're the recipients of all those other decisions that other people have made, and we stand in front of the public. Most folks don't know who their state representative or senator are, but I bet you they know who their school board representative is. And so that's a dynamic that makes it extremely difficult to get anything productive done, particularly when you're trying to move the system from compliance to performance. Okay, that's one aspect. Another is, if you think about the responsibilities of a school board member just in terms of hiring and supervising and supporting a superintendent, it requires board skills in legal, financial, real estate, HR, operations, before you ever get to education. And many of us on the board have little, if any, experience in those areas. And so then when confronted by an issue like this current one we went through, our personal experiences aren't up to the challenge. We haven't managed a CEO before running an 18,000 person organization of a budget of $1.2 billion. So to all of Molly's points, I would add to that our Board of Education members need to have the experience and the skill to manage professional employees, and not just professional employees, but a CEO of a large organization.
Well, you can say that, but how do you mandate that?
I don't think you can mandate it. I think it's a function of our democracy. We get what we elect. And so I think it's part of the board's responsibility to help explain what our duties are, and the public must decide what expectations they have of us as elected officials. And in my view, the expectations need to be raised significantly.
Let me say one thing. I appear in front of the school system, the school board, county commissioners, city council. These folks who do the school board, I think, have the hardest job. One, they have to ask for money from other bodies. They have no way of raising their own money. Mm-hmm. If you look at the statutes that deal with teachers, 115C is a very large set of statutes, many duties they have. They end up in a teacher dismissal hearing, ultimately having hearings. They do things that make, I think, the school board job the hardest of the three local boards, and I don't think we often recognize that when we're vetting and trying to find candidates.
So, Stick, let's come back to you, and not with the hat of Project Lift. While there might be an application in this answer for that, but as a business person, you are on the UNC Board of Trustees.
Yes.
They've had their challenges.
Yes.
You've seen a lot of things that you've had to step up, and you've had to encourage people to step up. If you could magically wave a wand and say you'd like to change an aspect of the school system as we know it in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, what would you compel? What would you change, and what would you have from the business standpoint?
Yeah. I guess the thing that I would change is, in business, great businesses give their CEO, their senior leaders or senior managers the opportunity to really look at opportunities, look at challenge, and make decisions. When I look at the district, and Eric pointed to this, so many of the decisions, the rules, and so forth are made in Raleigh. You know, these guys have extraordinary talent, they've got great passion, but they're very limited in the things that they can do, you know, especially in making changes. So when we put together Project Lift, and I know you didn't ask for this, but one of the things that we decided we needed to focus on was policy, and that's to have folks to help us in Raleigh to accomplish a few things. One of the things that we would consider to be basic is, how do you set up the calendar? Well, they don't have that flexibility to even establish the calendar. I mean, that's done in Raleigh.
You're talking about year-round schools versus...
That's exactly right. And so we had to go to Raleigh to get some flexibility for Project Lift schools just to be able to experiment with it. But you bring extraordinary, talented folks in, and then you tie their hands in some respects.
Joanna, if... what some of the best CEOs are guys and gals that get closest to the customer, that burn through the layers of bureaucracy and get down to where the customer or the end user or the consumer is. So what would you like to see either the school board do, and I'm asking you to speak for a lot of your colleagues too, no pressure, What would you like the school board to, or what expanded power would you like to see the superintendent have?
I'd like to see a mover and a shaker, and I think that's probably scary for a school board, and probably very difficult, but I think there are some issues that we've been sweeping under the rug, that we've been turning blind eyes to, that we've been putting Band-Aids on. And so I think for me, I would really like to see someone who's willing to take a little bit of a risk and really engage the community in some crucial and difficult conversations. I think that Charlotte-Mecklenburg is an amazing district who is very forward-looking, and I think that we still have some room to grow and some issues to address instead of trying to put little Band-Aids on.
Can big moves be made, Molly, by changing policy, going to Raleigh and changing public policy?
Definitely.
What
we
would you do?
We are a top-down state. There's
Yeah,
no question
right.
about that. Most of the important rules are dictated by Raleigh, starting with teacher salary. We have a salary schedule for teachers. We're not allowed to award our best teachers with the higher pay, which happens in every other segment of our economy. Pay for performance is a hot button issue, and certainly there's some good things and bad things about it, but we don't have the flexibility to do that. As Stick said, we can't change the calendar to do what makes sense for Charlotte or for any individual school in Charlotte. It's funny because both liberals and conservatives will talk about local control. But
You mean lack of local control?
No, about local control being a good thing. But in fact, we have very little when it comes down to that.
Would just making that one change, would that be a huge change in what schools can deliver and how schools operate?
Absolutely. And in North Carolina, remember, we have over 100 school systems, and some of them are tiny, and some of them are huge, like Charlotte and Wake. And so what's good for Charlotte and Wake isn't necessarily good for a system with 2,000 students. So it's a difficult thing, and I recognize that Raleigh has a difficult time, but the big school systems find their hands tied.
John, how do you think this situation with Heath Morris and surprise resignation and the questions swirling around process that the board did or did not do, Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board, how do you think that affects Charlotte beyond education, more than just education?
Well, I think it makes one of the things that people look to when they come to a city, when they move their headquarters, is the public school system. They say 145,000 students. I think this creates right now, if I were a CEO thinking about where to move, I think this would make me question one aspect of moving to Charlotte. There are many great aspects. We're increasing the links, we're doing things with UNCC downtown, but a lot of the children in my company are going to be in public schools. Some may end up in other places. So I think getting this behind us in a way that doesn't leave questions is very important. And that's why I would champion. There are several people in this state who would be very good at looking at this, saying, here's what you did right, here's what you did wrong, here's what you should do in the future so that this never happens again. And as long as we're getting, everybody looks at the Charlotte Observer every morning to see what the new story is. And as yet, we don't know the answer. And I think that's going to be a problem for Charlotte as a community.
If I could add one thing there, what this does is distract from what's going on in our schools. And as you said, there are wonderful things going on in our school system. And around the country, Charlotte-Mecklenburg is recognized as a leader for many innovative and exciting practices. And in any individual classroom, great things are going on. We need to get the focus back on that and not on what's happening at the administrative level.
So Molly, does this set us back like 2 or 3 steps? I mean, you're right. It seemed like we had some real momentum going. It seemed like people like Heath Morrison, and then bam, out of the blue, it completely derailed. So does this set us back? And oh, by the way, does this give more energy to charter schools, to private schools, to homeschooling, and to all the other alternatives that CMS does, if you will, battle with every day to get kids in the schools and get them taught appropriately.
It does set us back a bit, but I also think it's a teachable moment, a learning opportunity. And what we do next is going to determine how serious that setback is. As far as the competition, choice is here. CMS and every other system is going to have to compete for kids, and that's fine. Parents should be able to pick the school that's best for their child. For my own 5 children, I always found CMS was the best option. I want to focus on making it the best option for as many kids as possible.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
One thing we heard in the green room preparing, some of what Joanna does in her classroom now, which you may want to ask her, some of her techniques are things that are at the cutting edge of education.
And is that because, Joanna, because of what was the current administration? Or is that really, is that down on the level of just your principal says, take this idea and be innovative?
No, I think it definitely has to do with entire district policy. I have been lucky as an employee to be sent to national conferences to be recognized as part of national fellowships, and a lot of that has to do with district policy of how much do you value your teacher leaders. I definitely think that right now I wouldn't say that a student's education is being impacted by the change in leadership, but I definitely think that it is important to value teachers and innovation in teachers and to have a leader who makes that a priority.
Go ahead.
We've I was a first grader in this school system, and we've had terrific teachers, at least far beyond I've been on this earth, and we got a terrific one right here.
Absolutely.
And as you say, great things have been happening in our classroom for years. I think the difference that our previous superintendent brought to our school system was the ability to shine the light on so many of those great things happening in our schools.
And we're talking not about Pete Corman, but
no,
Heath Morrison.
And it's not just him. He empowered members of his team to go out and find those stories and get them in the public specter and develop good relationships with the media much better than in the past. And so what he brought to the table, one of the things was, we're going to shine the light on our stars. We're going to take it off the board, we'll put it on our stars, and we're going to help the public understand not just what's happening in their individual school, but across the system. And that has been a setback for them.
We've got about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to have to start to wrap it up here. What do you think, Eric, quickly, what do you think got misaligned or maybe misunderstood about this whole process, problem? What do you think people didn't really understand?
Well, by people, you mean the board?
No, I think we've sufficiently beat them about the head and shoulders during this program. But I mean, what do you think parents and the public have missed in this dialogue? What's been not paid attention to? What's important about this?
Well, one is we have an incredibly resilient system because of the core heart and soul of our system are our teachers. I think we should not take for granted what we have, whether it's a dynamic, effective superintendent, whether it's partners who could invest their money in any other school, but they chose to invest it in our system, whether it's attorneys who are willing to devote their life to ensuring that our teachers are fairly represented and treated fairly, and public servants who give of themselves to represent the system. Yeah, we're disappointed. Yes, we're frustrated. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else than Charlotte, North Carolina. Let's make the most of a good thing that we have, and let's recover from this and move forward.
And how important, Stick, is stability during this process and then beyond, finding a new leader?
I think it's critical, especially for a lot of the partners like those that I represent, to see stability in leadership, to see determination, continued determination among school board and other leaders, very, very important.
Yeah, Molly?
I just think communication is the key. That's the mistake that has been made. I don't know about what happens in the details.
Communication among board members?
Communication with the public and with parents and with employees. Too much was done under a cloak of secrecy. We need to, we're a team, and we need to communicate more effectively with our team.
Yeah, John, you thoughts about stability or next steps in about 30 seconds?
I agree with Molly. I mean, we've got to move forward. We can't have the notion that somebody who talks to the media should be investigated by the district attorney. No, we need to get fresh air on this. That'll be the quickest way to get it behind us.
Yep. Okay. Folks, ladies, gentlemen, you're good sports for coming on this in the middle of all this. I thank you genuinely. And thank you for your service, especially you that's in the mix, and Molly that you have done it before at Project Lift. John, I know you're a troublemaker in a good way, and we appreciate that. And Joanna, congratulations to you and your colleagues for keeping the ship going in the right direction. Nice to see you. Thank you for watching our program. Again, if you'd like, you like more comments, like to make comments about this, carolinabusinessreview.org. Make comments, send us suggestions. We'd like to thank WTVI for being our partner, and again, this panel for doing such an outstanding program. Good night. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health. Bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.